All right, let's jump right in. We're taking a deep dive into this chapter you sent over, all about early Christians in Ephesus. It's like part of a bigger work, but even on its own, it's pretty amazing. These stories of how they handled all these challenges, how they got their message out there. Well, there are some serious lessons we can learn from them, even today.
What's really fascinating here is how these early Christians weren't just like waiting around. They were really shaping their world, figuring out how to navigate a very complex social scene.
It's like they were building a movement,
Yeah.
right, from the ground up, and not always in the most obvious ways. We see these two central figures in this chapter, Apollos and Paul, both making waves, but in totally different ways.
Exactly. And it's like their different approaches, show us just how many different talents and personalities were drawn to this early Christian community.
Okay, so Apollos, he kind of bursts onto the scene in Ephesus. This incredible speaker already knows the scriptures inside and out.
Yeah.
And here's the thing.
He's missing a piece. He's got this solid foundation from John the Baptist, but he needs an update on the whole Jesus thing. And that's where this, seemingly ordinary couple, Aquila and Priscilla, come in.
It's amazing, right? Apollos, this eloquent, knowledgeable guy, is open to correction from a couple who made tents for a living. It makes you think, are we as receptive to feedback? Especially when it comes from, unexpected places. Maybe that's the takeaway here. Real wisdom is knowing you never stop learning.
Absolutely. And how Apollos reacts is a masterclass in humility. I mean, he doesn't get defensive or just dismiss what they're saying. He takes the opportunity to learn, to refine his understanding, and that actually makes him even more effective at spreading the Christian message.
Right. It's a good reminder. Sometimes the most valuable lessons come from the people we least expect. What about you? Have you had mentors like that? People who've shaped your path, maybe weren't in big, important positions, but really made a difference?
Oh, for sure. I think we all have those people, right? The ones who quietly guide and support us, and often they don't even want any credit for it. But their impact is huge.
So while Apollos is out there sharing his refined message, Paul's on the move again, but he's not heading straight to Ephesus. He's taking the scenic route, you could say. Why is that?
Paul, always the shepherd, was focused on strengthening the disciples along the way. He put their needs before his own, comfort and convenience, a real example of leading by serving.
Yeah, this whole detour Paul takes. It reminds me of mentors I've had. They weren't always the most famous or anything, but they went out of their way to guide and support me. Really makes you appreciate those people working behind the scenes, supporting and encouraging others.
Yeah, it's those unsung heroes, right? Those who really invest in others, no fanfare. They're often the ones who lay the foundation for lasting change. Their dedication can have a ripple effect, influence so many lives.
So Paul finally gets to Ephesus, and guess what he finds? More disciples who need a little theological tune-up. This time, it's a group of John the Baptist's followers. Like Apollos, they need to catch up on the latest.
And here again, we see how important it is to be open to, to evolving understanding, evolving teachings. This wasn't a stagnant belief system. It was dynamic, responsive to new revelations.
Right. It's a good reminder. Learning is a lifelong journey. And even when we think we've got it all figured out, there's always something more to discover, to integrate into our understanding. So Paul starts preaching in the synagogue, but things get a little tense.
Yeah, there's some pushback. Not everyone is thrilled about his message.
And instead of getting bogged down in arguments, Paul switches gears. He moves his whole operation to a lecture hall, basically an ancient auditorium, where he can connect with an audience that's, more receptive.
It's a great example of adaptability, knowing when to change tactics. He didn't let pride or stubbornness get in the way of sharing the message. Sometimes you got to find a different stage,
And Paul didn't just dabble in Ephesus. He went all in. For 2 years, he kept up this intense teaching schedule. It's estimated he spent over 3,000 hours spreading the Christian message.
His work ethic is incredible, and that adaptability, too. He was willing to put in the work, meet people where they were at, literally and figuratively.
And this is where things get really interesting. Paul's work in Ephesus starts making headlines, attracts a lot of curious listeners, and he starts performing extraordinary, powerful works,
Yeah.
like healing people, even casting out demons.
Yeah, you couldn't ignore those. It really brought the reality of his message into focus. Couldn't just dismiss it as some abstract philosophy anymore.
Exactly. And this is where we see the difference between genuine faith and just, going through the motions. We had these guys, the sons of Sceva, they thought they could just copy Paul's power by invoking the names of Jesus and Paul, but
Yeah, it backfired big time. The demon they were trying to exorcise basically laughed at them. Who are you? It's a great illustration, right? True power comes from a genuine connection with the divine, not from empty rituals or just saying the right
It
words.
makes you think, right? Are there areas in our own lives where we're relying on, like outward symbols or labels, instead of cultivating real interchange? It's something to think about.
It really is. And the impact of Paul's actions, his genuine actions, it was undeniable. People started to turn away from their old ways, even burning their magic books. And those books were supposedly worth a fortune.
Wow, imagine that. Giving up your old beliefs publicly, even if it costs you a lot, because you found something more powerful, more authentic.
It shows a profound shift happening in people's hearts and minds.
Mm.
They were going through a transformation that went way beyond just agreeing intellectually. It was a complete reorientation of their lives.
Really makes you think about what old ways we might be holding on to, things that are keeping us from that kind of growth and transformation.
Could be fear of change, maybe, comfort in the familiar, even resistance to letting go of beliefs that don't really serve us anymore. It's a deeply personal question, but worth exploring.
Now, even with all these successes, it wasn't always smooth sailing for Paul and the early Christians. They faced a major challenge, a riot, and the person who started it might surprise you.
Yeah, it wasn't a religious leader or a rival philosopher. It was a silversmith, Demetrius, and his motivation was, well, mainly economic. He saw the spread of Christianity as a threat to his livelihood.
It's a reminder, right? Religious conflicts often have social and economic factors tangled up in them. It's not always just about theological differences.
Demetrius was worried people would stop buying his silver shrines to Artemis if they converted to Christianity. So he riled up a mob, played on their fears and nationalistic pride.
It's a fascinating case study how fear and economic self-interest can be used to manipulate people, to manipulate public opinion.
And it's a tactic that's still used today, unfortunately, and it often has devastating consequences.
But there's a glimmer of hope in all this chaos. The city recorder, basically a high-ranking official, manages to calm the mob down by appealing to logic and the rule of law.
He reminds them that their actions have consequences and that there are legal ways to address their concerns. It's a testament to the power of reason and due process, even when emotions are running high.
So despite facing opposition, economic threats, even violence,
The message of the early Christians kept spreading. The word of Jehovah, as our text puts it, kept growing and prevailing.
now, for those who aren't familiar with the term, Jehovah is a name for God, used in some translations of the Bible.
Mm.
And it's this idea of God's word, the early Christians' message, continuing to thrive despite all these obstacles. I find that so inspiring. It speaks to their resilience, the enduring power of their faith.
Yeah, it's a testament to their dedication, their conviction. And it reminds us that truth has a way of getting out there no matter the barriers.
The sense of community, shared purpose, it's striking. It makes you think, what are those bigger than ourselves things we're a part of today?
That's a great question. It makes us consider how we can contribute to something meaningful, something that goes beyond our individual lives and has a real lasting impact on the world around us.
All right, before we get too philosophical, let's take a quick pause here. When we come back, we'll dig into more of these incredible stories and see what other nuggets of wisdom we can uncover. And we're back, picking up our deep dive into early Christianity in Ephesus, where things got pretty intense, you know?
Yeah, we left off with that riot, remember?
No.
Started by a silversmith worried about his business, but even with that going on, the word of Jehovah kept spreading.
It's an amazing image of resilience, right?
Yeah.
But let's step back for a second. We've been talking about these big dramatic events, but what about everyday life for these early Christians? What was it like to actually be a part of this community?
Well, the text kind of hints at a really strong sense of community, mutual support. It wasn't just about shared beliefs. It was about sharing their lives, helping each other through the tough times.
Right. It wasn't all miracles and speeches. There was real practical care going on. Like, if someone was sick, others stepped in to help. If someone lost their job because of their faith, the community was there for them. That's powerful, especially back then when being a Christian could cost you everything.
For sure, that sense of belonging, that shared purpose, it must have been so important, especially when they were facing hostility from the outside world. It wasn't just about faith, it was about survival.
It makes you think about the communities we're a part of now, you know? Are we offering that same level of support to each other? Or are we more focused on, like, individual success and appearances. It's something to think about.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the busyness of everything and forget about real connection, real
Yeah.
support. But those early Christians, they remind us that real strength comes from sticking together, sharing the burdens, and celebrating the wins as a community.
Okay, before we get too far off track, let's circle back to something we mentioned before. Apollos and Paul. These two really dynamic figures shaping the early Christian movement. They had very different styles, but they were both so effective. What can we learn from that, from their different approaches?
I think it shows how important it is to embrace, well, a diversity of talents and perspectives. Apollos was this amazing speaker, captivating people with his words. Paul, he was more of a teacher, a theologian, going deep into the meaning of the faith.
And both were essential.
Hmm.
You needed the inspiration, the rhetoric, and the deep intellectual understanding to really build a movement.
Exactly. It's like having a great composer and a fantastic conductor. Both are crucial to creating a beautiful symphony.
Now, one thing that stood out to me as we were looking at this material was how those early Christians dealt with opposition. They didn't back down, but they didn't always fight fire with fire. They were strategic,
Yeah.
adaptable, like when Paul moved his teaching to the lecture hall.
Right. They understood that sometimes the best way to deal with resistance isn't through confrontation, but through, well, kind of creative maneuvering. It's about finding new ways to share the message, even when the usual paths are blocked.
Yeah, there's a lesson in there for us, don't you think?
Yeah.
How often do we get stuck in our ways, doing things a certain way, even when it's clearly not working? Maybe we need a little bit of that early Christian adaptability, that willingness to change gears, to find new ways to make a difference.
That's a valuable skill no matter what you do, whether
Mhm.
you're building a business, fighting for social change, or even just figuring out, complicated family dynamics. Being able to adapt, to roll with the punches can be the key to success.
Speaking of success, it's pretty amazing how fast that early Christian movement grew, even with all the pushback they faced. What made them so effective?
Well, their belief in their message, it was unshakable. They really believed they were sharing something powerful, something that could change people's lives for the better. And that conviction, it was contagious.
It wasn't just an idea, it was a whole new way of life, a way to find meaning and purpose in a world that often felt, well, chaotic and unfair.
And they didn't just talk the talk, they walked the walk. They lived out their beliefs, showing compassion, generosity, courage, even when they were being persecuted. People could see that these Christians, they were the real deal.
That authenticity must have been incredible to see, especially in a society where hypocrisy and corruption were, everywhere. People could see these Christians were living their truth.
And they weren't shy about sharing it, even when it was dangerous or unpopular. They were bold, persistent. They found creative ways to get their message out, even with the risks.
And it wasn't just about preaching to crowds. They focused on building relationships, one-on-one connections that allowed them to share their faith in a more personal, authentic way. It was like a grassroots movement,
Yeah.
right? Fueled by word of mouth and personal stories.
It's a good reminder. Sometimes the most powerful communication isn't through mass media or big announcements, but through real human connection. Sharing our stories, listening to others, and building relationships based on trust and authenticity.
And those relationships, those connections, they're what got them through the tough times. They had each other's backs, offering support and encouragement when things got rough. It wasn't just about spreading a message. It was about building a community of love and resilience.
And that community went beyond just geography, right? They were connected to a bigger network of believers through letters, messengers, shared traditions. It was like an early version of social media, but with a much deeper sense of purpose and connection.
Speaking of connection, one thing that struck me about this material is how those early Christians tied their faith to the everyday lives of the people they were talking to. They weren't just talking about abstract ideas, they were addressing real problems, offering real solutions.
Right. They understood that faith wasn't something separate from daily life. It was meant to inform and transform every part of their lives. They saw their beliefs as a guide for how to live, how to treat others, how to make a positive impact on the world around them.
They weren't afraid to get involved, to deal with the messy realities of their society. They were healers, teachers, advocates for the people who were marginalized. They saw their faith as a call to action, a way to bring hope and healing to a world that desperately needed it.
And their example, it's a powerful reminder for us. Faith isn't just about believing, it's about doing. It's about putting those beliefs into action, using our talents and resources to make a difference for others.
It's about stepping outside our comfort zones, challenging injustice, and building a more compassionate, more just world.
Exactly. It's about living out our faith in a way that's both personal and public, transformative and impactful.
All right, before we get too carried away, let's take another quick break. When we come back, we'll wrap up our deep dive with some final thoughts on the lessons we can learn from these remarkable early Christians.
And we're back. It's pretty incredible how much we've covered in this deep dive, right? We've talked about riots, miracles, and even a little bit of ancient economics.
Yeah, I know. It's
Yeah.
amazing. And it just shows you these early Christians in Ephesus, they weren't just, sitting around talking about theology. They were out there living their faith, building community, and making a real difference in their world. It's, well, honestly, it's pretty inspiring.
You know, what I find really interesting is how they managed to, like, hold on to their beliefs while still adapting to new situations.
Yeah.
They didn't compromise on their core values, but they were willing to be flexible in their approach.
Yeah, it's like they knew that the message itself was more important than any one way of getting it out there. They were willing to meet people where they were at, literally and figuratively.
And that's a really valuable lesson for us today, I think. In a world that's changing all the time, we need to be able to, hold on to what's important while still being open to new ways of thinking, new ways of doing things.
Yeah, it's so easy to get caught up, defending our own positions or just sticking to old habits, even when they aren't really working for us anymore. The early Christians, they remind us that to grow, to make progress, we have to be willing to let go of what's comfortable and embrace the unknown.
And that can be scary, of course. Change is, well, it's not always easy. But if we really want to make a difference, if we want to live lives that have like real purpose and meaning, then we got to be willing to step outside our comfort zones and, well, embrace those challenges, embrace that growth.
Earlier we were talking about the Ephesians burning their magic books, right?
Yeah.
This is really dramatic way of saying they were done with their old ways.
Mm-hmm.
It makes you wonder, what are those magic books in our own lives?
Mm.
The beliefs, the habits, maybe even relationships that are holding us back from, being who we can truly be.
That's a deep question, a really personal one, and I don't think there's any, like, easy answer. But it's a question we should ask ourselves, honestly and bravely. What are we holding on to that isn't helping us anymore? What are we afraid to let go of, even if it might be blocking us from, real growth and transformation?
Yeah, could be a belief we have about ourselves that's holding us back, a fear of failure, something that keeps us from chasing our dreams. Maybe it's a relationship that's become, toxic or draining. Whatever it is, recognizing those magic books, having the courage to let them go, that could be such a powerful step towards creating a more authentic and fulfilling life.
And we don't have to do it alone. I mean, one of the big things we've seen in this deep dive is the power of community. The early Christians, they supported each other through tough times, celebrated the wins together, and they held each other accountable. They knew that faith, it's not a journey you're supposed to make alone.
Yeah, that's so important. We all need those people, the ones who encourage us, who challenge us, who remind us of, who we really are, people who walk beside us on that path of growth and change.
So as we're wrapping up this deep dive into the world of those early Christians in Ephesus, I want to leave you with one last thought. Their story, it's not just something from the past, it's a reminder that faith is a powerful force for change.
They faced incredible challenges, but they never gave up on their beliefs. They were compassionate and they were willing to adapt, to innovate. And because of that, they made a real lasting difference in the world. Their example can inspire us to do the same.
So think about the things we've talked about today. What stands out to you? What challenges you? And how can you take these ideas and, apply them to your own life, to your own journey, your own growth and transformation?
Thanks for joining us in this amazing deep dive. We hope you found it as, well, thought-provoking and inspiring as we have. We'll see you next time.